Imagine you're watching this massive blockbuster movie, right? Like a huge epic.
Okay, yeah.
But the main character, the absolute driver of every single plot twist, the one who literally saves the day, is completely invisible to the audience.
Right. So you see the effects of what they're doing everywhere, but you never actually see them on screen.
Exactly. And for today's deep dive, and today is April 1st, 2026. By the way, we're actually tracking down that exact invisible actor, but in the physical world.
Yeah.
It's an element that is almost certainly like sitting in your pocket right now. It's holding up the building you're sitting in. And at this exact second, it is literally replicating your DNA.
It's wild to think about.
It really is. Our mission today is to uncover the hidden, highly strategic life of zinc.
And, the sheer ubiquity of it is just staggering when you look at the numbers. I mean, it's the fourth most consumed metal on the planet.
Right, trailing just behind, what, iron, aluminum, and copper?
Exactly. But it is practically invisible to most of us. And the thing is that invisibility isn't just some clever metaphor. It's an actual physical characteristic that defined its entire history.
Yeah, and it's basically the reason it acts as this ultimate behind-the-scenes power player in modern geopolitics, which is also why it was just recently added to the U.S. critical minerals list.
Which is a huge deal.
It is. So we've pulled together this really fascinating stack of sources for you today to figure out how something so incredibly common becomes so critical. We're looking at a comprehensive metallurgical and biological analysis paper.
A really dense one, too.
Oh, yeah, super dense. Plus some insights from the World Economic Forum on the low-carbon economy, some historical data from Wikipedia, and chemical property breakdowns from Allen Educational Resources.
It's a great stack.
Yeah, so to understand why zinc is so overlooked by us today, we actually have to look at why it was quite literally invisible to ancient metallurgists.
Right, if you go back a few thousand years, zinc was, well, it was the ultimate escape artist of the periodic table.
The escape artist.
Yeah, and this all comes down to a very specific fundamental quirk in its physical properties. So zinc melts at a relatively low 419.5 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
But it boils at 907 degrees Celsius.
Which, 907 sounds really high to me, but for a metal, that's actually an incredibly low boiling point. Yeah.
Exactly. It's very low. Historically, to extract any metal from its raw ore, you have to smelt it.
Right, you heat it up.
Yeah, you heat the ore up with carbon, usually charcoal, to basically strip away the oxygen or the sulfur that's holding the metal bound inside the rock.
Okay, makes sense.
But the chemical reaction required to extract zinc from its ore using carbon, it only triggers at temperatures above 900 degrees Celsius.
Oh, wow. Meaning the temperature you need to free the zinc is actually higher than the temperature where zinc turns into a gas.
Yes, exactly. So picture an ancient blacksmith, right? Working at a traditional smelting furnace. They throw in their zinc ore, they pump the bellows to get the heat high enough to trigger the extraction.
And it just vanishes.
Literally. The moment the zinc is freed from the rock, it immediately vaporizes. It pulls this disappearing act, escaping right up the chimney with the exhaust gases.
That is so frustrating. It's pulling a smoke bomb routine every single time they tried to pin it down.
Every time.
So the Romans, they were using brass, right, which is a mix of copper and zinc, but they must have been making it without ever actually seeing the pure zinc itself.
They did. They used this really clever workaround called the cementation process.
How does that work?
They would take solid copper, place it in a crucible with a zinc carbonate ore, which is called calamine, and add charcoal. Then they heated the whole thing up.
But it's enclosed.
Right, enclosed.
Yeah.
So the zinc would vaporize inside the crucible, and that gas would be instantly absorbed directly into the solid copper to create brass.
Wow.
Yeah, they never isolated pure liquid zinc. They were essentially just capturing its ghost.
Capturing its ghost. That is fascinating. Now, I was looking at the historical data, and the alchemists took a slightly different approach, right?
They did, yeah.
They would sometimes manage to burn zinc metal in the open air, and it created these fluffy white clumps that collected on all their equipment. And they had a really poetic name for it. They called it philosopher's wool or white snow.
Which sounds very mystical, but chemically, what they were doing was just creating zinc oxide.
Right.
The zinc vapor hit the oxygen in the air, oxidized instantly, and then condensed into those white fibrous tufts. But again, they were catching a byproduct, not the pure metal itself.
So who actually figured it out? Because to find the people who solved the puzzle of capturing the escape artist, we actually have to look to India, don't we?
We do. The sources pinpoint the Zawar mines in Rajasthan, going back as early as the 6th century BC.
That is incredibly early.
It is. The Indian metallurgists achieved large-scale production of pure metallic zinc by inventing something called inverted distillation.
Inverted distillation. Break that down for us.
So it's this brilliant piece of thermodynamic engineering. Normally heat rises, right?
Right.
And vapor goes up and out the top of a kiln. Well, the metallurgists at Zawar packed clay, retorts basically these long cylindrical vessels with zinc, ore, and carbon.
Yeah.
But instead of leaving the top open, they sealed it completely.
Okay.
And they directed a tube pointing downwards from the retort into a lower collection chamber that was kept cool.
Wait, so they forced the vapor against its natural path?
Yeah.
Downwards.
Exactly. The fire was built around the upper part of the retorts, so as the zinc vaporized, the pressure physically forced the gas downward into that cooler chamber below.
Oh, wow.
And because it hit that sudden sharp drop in temperature, the vapor condensed back into pure liquid zinc before it could react with the air or escape.
That is genius.
They essentially trapped the vapor and forced it to materialize. And they were doing this on an industrial scale centuries before Western chemists figured out the same mechanism.
That's incredible. So we finally managed to capture this escape artist in the physical world, relying on these massive engineering workarounds. But the irony of the whole thing is, once we actually pin it down under a microscope, we discover that this exact same element has been quietly orchestrating our internal biology since the dawn of time.
It really has. It is arguably the most vital trace metal in the human body, second only to iron in terms of pure abundance.
Right.
But what truly sets zinc apart biologically is its sheer versatility. I mean, it is the only metal found in all classes of enzymes.
All of them.
All of them. It is structurally or catalytically involved in over 3,000 human proteins. That means roughly 10% of the entire human proteome relies on zinc ions just to function.
That's huge. And I really want to focus on how it reads our genetic code, because the biological analysis paper spends a ton of time on these structures called zinc fingers.
Yeah, zinc fingers are a perfect example of its biological essentiality.
Okay, exactly.
So to read or copy DNA, proteins have to physically slot into the major groove of the DNA double helix.
Like a key in a lock.
Exactly. But proteins are these long chains of amino acids, and they need to fold into very specific rigid shapes to actually fit into that groove.
Okay.
A zinc finger is a tiny structural fold in a protein where a single zinc ion acts as the linchpin. The protein basically wraps itself around the zinc ion, which stabilizes the fold.
And if the zinc isn't there...
Without that zinc ion holding the structure together, the protein unravels, and your DNA literally cannot be read or regulated properly.
See, I have to push back here on the mechanics of this, though, because we are talking about a metal,
Right.
and at room temperature, pure zinc is known for being somewhat brittle. So how does a brittle industrial metal act as this incredibly precise, flexible tool inside a microscopic biological cell?
That is the big question. The secret lies in what chemists call its coordination geometry.
Coordination geometry, okay.
Yeah, because of zinc's unique electron configuration, basically its atomic architecture. It is incredibly flexible in how it bonds with other molecules.
Okay, so it's not stiff.
Not at all. In a biological setting, it doesn't act like a rigid steel beam. It acts much more like a highly dynamic multi-directional hinge.
Oh, a hinge. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it allows enzymes to rapidly shift shapes, grab onto a target molecule, facilitate a chemical reaction, and then immediately let go and return to its original shape.
Okay, a dynamic hinge mechanism completely tracks. And it's not just facilitating DNA either. It's aggressively defending the body, basically acting as the gatekeeper of the immune system.
Totally. It is absolutely crucial for the development and activation of our white blood cells.
Right.
And it actively scavenges what are called reactive oxygen species.
Free radicals.
Exactly. These really unstable, highly reactive molecules that basically tear through your cells, causing oxidative stress and cellular damage. Zinc steps in to neutralize them.
It's like a cellular bodyguard.
Exactly. Furthermore, it acts as a second messenger in cellular signaling. When a cell needs to sound the alarm about an infection, it actually releases a burst of zinc ions to communicate with neighboring cells.
Kind of like how calcium works in muscle contraction.
Very similar, yes.
Okay, so because zinc is orchestrating all the cellular activity, our bodies are just burning through it constantly, which means we have to replenish it.
We do.
But getting it from our food isn't as straightforward as it seems. The sources point out that oysters are, by far, the absolute richest dietary source of zinc.
Oh yeah, by a wide margin.
Yet there's this massive global health issue where an estimated 17% of the global population is actually zinc deficient.
Which is a huge number.
It is. And the paper mentions that leaning heavily into a plant-based diet can actually exacerbate this deficiency because of compounds called phytates.
Right, phytates.
How do phytates physically stop us from absorbing the zinc we eat?
So phytic acid, or phytates, is the storage form of phosphorus. You find it in a lot of whole grains, legumes, and seeds.
Okay, pretty common healthy food.
Very common.
Yeah.
But the molecule has these chemical arms that are highly negatively charged. Zinc ions, on the other hand, are positively charged. So when you digest them together in your gut, the phytates act like powerful magnets. They snap right onto the zinc ions.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, it creates this massive, bulky, insoluble complex. Your intestinal walls physically cannot absorb a molecule that large.
Wow.
So you might be eating a diet that technically contains enough zinc on paper, but the phytates are chemically locking it away and escorting it right out of your digestive tract.
That is wild. But, as essential as it is for life, there is a very fine line with toxicity.
Definitely.
I found this piece of trivia in the research that completely surprised me. So, if a dog swallows a U.S. penny minted after 1982,
Oh, the 1982 switch.
right, which is when they switched pennies to be 97.5% solid zinc with just a really thin copper plating, if a dog swallows one of those, it can actually be fatal.
It's a huge veterinary emergency.
Yeah, because the highly acidic environment of a dog's stomach immediately strips away that thin copper plating and starts dissolving the raw zinc underneath.
Right.
And this creates zinc chloride, which is incredibly corrosive and literally burns severe ulcers into the stomach lining.
And that's the thing. The intense reactivity that makes it so useful as a biological catalyst is the exact same thing that makes it dangerous in the wrong context.
Yeah.
You actually see this same danger with certain over-the-counter cold remedies. People using excessive amounts of zinc-based nasal sprays have actually developed anosmia,
Wait, anosmia, that's the total loss of smell, right?
a total permanent loss of their sense of smell.
Just from a nasal spray, because the zinc is destroying the tissue.
Specifically, the free zinc ion acts as an aggressive electron scavenger, what chemists call a Lewis acid.
Okay.
So when it's applied directly in high concentrations to the nasal cavity, it aggressively rips electrons away from the delicate olfactory nerve receptors.
Oh.
It effectively kills the nerves that allow you to smell.
Oh my God.
Yeah, the FDA actually had to step in and issue warnings about it.
That is terrifying. But that fierce chemical reactivity, the exact same trait that makes it toxic to the delicate nerves in your nose, is precisely the weapon that engineers exploit to protect our cities.
It really is.
Which brings us to the industrial world, where zinc's absolute primary role is to be the ultimate sacrificial bodyguard for our physical infrastructure. We are talking about galvanization.
Right. And just to frame how big this is, galvanization accounts for 50 to 60% of all the zinc produced globally.
Over half of it.
Easily. It is the process of coating iron or steel with a protective layer of zinc to prevent rust.
And I always picture zinc here as like the Secret Service agent throwing itself in the line of fire. The steel beam is the VIP, and the zinc is actively taking the bullet.
That's a great way to think about it. In engineering, we call it a sacrificial anode.
Hmm.
And to understand the mechanics of how it actually takes that bullet,
Yeah.
we have to look at the galvanic series.
Break that down for us.
So zinc is more electronegative than iron. This means that when both metals are exposed to the elements, water and oxygen, zinc is much more unstable and eager to give up its electrons than iron is.
Okay, and oxidation or rusting is simply the loss of electrons, right?
Exactly. Because zinc is so eager to donate its electrons, it actively attracts the oxidation process to itself.
So it creates a sort of galvanic cell. It's essentially feeding electrons into the iron so the iron physically cannot rust.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. When galvanized steel is exposed to the atmosphere, the zinc reacts with carbon dioxide in the air to form a tight, highly stable layer of zinc carbonate.
Okay, so that's the initial physical barrier.
Right. But the true magic happens when that barrier fails.
When it gets scratched.
Yeah. If a galvanized beam gets deeply scratched and the bare steel underneath is suddenly exposed to the rain, the steel still won't rust.
Because of the zinc around it.
Yes, the zinc coating surrounding the scratch will literally corrode itself preferentially, sending its electrons across the gap to the exposed steel to protect it.
Oh.
It sacrifices its own atomic structure to keep the steel intact. This cathodic protection is exactly why car manufacturers can confidently offer 12-year rust warranties on modern car bodies.
That is amazing. And the protection extends beyond just coating steel, right? Because the sources mention that molten zinc has an incredibly low viscosity. It flows almost like water compared to molten iron.
It's very fluid, yeah.
And this high fluidity makes it the premier metal for high-pressure die casting. Engineers use these ZAMAC alloys, which are zinc mixed with small amounts of aluminum, magnesium, and copper, to basically inject into incredibly complex, intricate molds at high speeds.
Oh, it's everywhere.
Right, it's making everything from the zipper on your jacket to the complex internal pathways of a car carburetor.
And it also stabilizes the rubber industry.
Wait, really? Rubber?
Yeah, zinc oxide is a critical curing additive in manufacturing car tires. It helps cross-link the rubber polymers during vulcanization, which allows the tire to resist the immense heat and physical wear of driving at high speeds.
I had no idea.
You literally cannot drive down the street without relying on zinc in multiple forms.
So, because zinc is the ultimate protector of our infrastructure, it makes sense that it has suddenly become the absolute linchpin of the 21st century green energy transition.
Absolutely.
And that transition is currently running headfirst into a massive geopolitical bottleneck.
Right. Connecting this to the low-carbon economy, we really have to recognize that renewable energy infrastructure is unbelievably steel-intensive.
Oh, tons of steel.
And unlike a traditional power plant that sits somewhat protected inland, wind and solar farms are deployed in the most punishing environments on Earth.
Constant salt spray, desert heat.
Relentless moisture.
Yeah, and the World Economic Forum data highlights just how heavily these structures rely on that sacrificial anode we just talked about. I mean, just looking at the WEF data from our sources, a single 10-megawatt offshore wind turbine requires roughly 4 tons of zinc just to survive the marine corrosion.
4 tons per turbine.
Yeah. And a 100-megawatt solar park, which produces enough power for maybe 110,000 homes, that requires 240 tons of zinc for its mounting racks and supports alone.
It's massive. And without zinc taking the hit, the green transition simply rusts away before it ever pays off its carbon footprint.
Completely. And zinc is also stepping into the energy storage game now, right?
Oh, the battery sector, yes. Zinc-ion batteries are emerging as a really massive grid storage alternative to lithium-ion batteries.
Why zinc over lithium?
The primary advantage is safety. Because zinc-ion batteries use water-based electrolytes, they're entirely non-flammable.
Oh, that's huge.
It is. You can build giant stationary battery parks near densely populated cities without any of the catastrophic thermal runaway or fire risks associated with lithium.
Okay, but here's my major pushback on this entire supply chain panic.
Let's hear it.
The Wikipedia source clearly states zinc is the 24th most abundant element in the Earth's crust. So it is naturally very abundant. Furthermore, we know it is 100% recyclable without any loss in quality. So if there is plenty of it in the ground and we can recycle it indefinitely, how on earth is it suddenly on the U.S. critical minerals list? How can there be a strategic shortage of something we have so much of?
It's a great question, and it introduces a concept that resource economists call the byproduct paradox.
The byproduct paradox.
Yes. You are entirely correct. Zinc itself is relatively abundant. The strategic vulnerability causing all this panic is not necessarily about the zinc alone.
Okay, what is it about?
It's about the fact that zinc is the essential host metal for other incredibly rare elements, specifically germanium and gallium.
Oh, so they hitch a ride inside the zinc ore.
Exactly. They are found locked away in trace amounts within zinc sulfide deposits, which is an ore known as sphalerite. And germanium and gallium are absolute magic in the high-tech world.
What are they used for?
They are the critical semiconductor elements required for fiber optic networks, high-efficiency solar cells, and advanced infrared defense systems.
Wow, okay, so military and major telecommunications.
Yeah, you simply cannot build modern telecommunications or advanced military targeting systems without them.
And the paradox is that to get those trace tech metals, you are physically forced to mine and refine massive quantities of zinc.
Exactly. You cannot secure a domestic supply of germanium and gallium without maintaining a massive, robust, primary zinc smelting industry. You have to process millions of tons of raw zinc just to sift out these tiny, vital trace byproducts.
Now, to be clear, we aren't taking a political stance here. We are just looking strictly at the data provided by the World Economic Forum in our source stack. But according to their 2025 and 2026 reports, where does this global supply chain actually stand right now?
Well, the concentration of refining is heavily skewed. China currently controls about 68% of global germanium production, along with a vast majority of the world's actual zinc refining capacity.
And the U.S.
The United States mines plenty of raw zinc, or it actually remains a top 5 global producer. But the U.S. has essentially hollowed out its domestic refining capacity over the last few decades.
Meaning they dig the rock out of the ground, but they just don't have the facilities to process it here.
Right, so the U.S. exports its raw zinc concentrate across the Pacific for processing, and then has to turn around and import 73% of its refined, usable zinc metal back.
That seems incredibly inefficient.
It is, and crucially, by exporting the raw ore, the U.S. loses all access to those high-tech byproducts. The facilities doing the refining are the ones capturing the germanium and gallium,
So they are literally giving away the secret sauce just by exporting the raw dirt.
which is exactly why Western nations, including the U.S. and Australia, are now scrambling to rebuild domestic smelting capacity. They are heavily investing in facilities that use the RLE process to try and regain control of that entire supply chain.
Okay, break down the RLE process for us. What does that actually entail?
RLE stands for roasting, leaching, and electrowinning.
Okay.
First, you roast the ore, basically baking it at extremely high temperatures to burn off the sulfur.
Right.
Then the leaching phase involved dissolving that roasted ore in giant baths of sulfuric acid.
Sounds intense.
It is. And finally, electrowinning involves running massive electrical currents through that acidic liquid to literally pull the pure zinc ions out of the solution and plate them onto large metal sheets.
Okay, so it's a huge operation.
Very much so.
Yeah.
It is an incredibly energy-intensive process, but it allows you to carefully extract those critical tech byproducts at the same time.
But expanding all this massive industrial mining and, these huge acid baths, that isn't free from a cost perspective, especially environmentally.
No, not at all.
If zinc is so crucial for the green energy transition, how green is it to actually pull it out of the ground?
It remains a very significant environmental challenge. Mining zinc sulfide ores frequently triggers a devastating chain reaction known as acid mine drainage, or AMD.
How does it happen?
Well, when you dig up these deeply buried sulfide minerals and expose them to surface oxygen and rainwater, they oxidize and naturally create sulfuric acid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this acid then acts like a sponge as it flows through the earth, leaching highly toxic heavy metals, things like lead, cadmium, and arsenic, straight out of the surrounding rock and carrying them into local groundwater systems.
So it just poisons the local watersheds.
It can, yeah.
How does the industry actually stop that chemical reaction from starting in the first place?
The industry is pushing hard into new engineering standards to prevent it. One of the primary solutions right now is dry stacking for mine tailings.
What is dry stacking?
Instead of storing the waste rock in massive wet sludge ponds, they use massive filter presses to squeeze all the water out of the waste, and they stack it as dry dirt. Without the water, the acid-forming chemical reaction cannot initiate.
That makes sense.
There is also a major push toward green zinc. Because the final refining step, the electrowinning, relies entirely on massive amounts of electricity. If you power that specific smelter with wind or solar energy, you can theoretically produce zero-carbon zinc.
So looking at the incredible journey we've mapped out today, it is just staggering.
It really is.
I mean, we started with an invisible vapor, the escape artist that frustrated ancient alchemists and completely vanished up Roman chimneys.
Right.
Then we found that exact same element acting as the ultimate biological gatekeeper, forming the dynamic hinges of our DNA and neutralizing the free radicals tearing through our cells.
Yeah.
And finally, we see it as the sacrificial bodyguard of our modern world, literally taking the chemical hit to protect our bridges, our cars, and the entire physical framework of our green energy future.
It spans the microscopic to the macroeconomic seamlessly. And, as we wrap up this analysis, I actually want to leave you with one final lingering idea to ponder.
Please do.
We discussed earlier how zinc is 100% infinitely recyclable without losing any of its structural integrity.
Right.
And we know it is currently being deployed to coat massive structures that are built to last a century. Things like solar farms, wind turbines, skyscrapers.
Basically, the VIPs of the infrastructure world.
Exactly. And because we are locking so much zinc into these long-term structures, our modern cities and energy grids have essentially become massive above-ground mines.
Above-ground mines.
Think about it. Think about the iconic titanium zinc roofs covering Paris. The millions of miles of galvanized steel guardrails lining our global highways. the frames of every single electric vehicle on the road. They constitute a staggering anthropogenic ore bank.
An anthropogenic ore bank.
Yeah, a man-made deposit of refined metal.
Oh, wow. So we have pulled the metal out of the earth and basically stored it in plain sight.
Exactly. We have extracted so much zinc and locked it into our built environment that future generations might not need to mine zinc from the earth at all.
That is wild.
When those structures finally reach the end of their century-long lifespans, our descendants won't be digging holes in the ground. They will simply harvest the cities we are building today, melting down our old infrastructure to build the world of tomorrow.
We are literally building the mines of the future right above our heads.
We really are.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you look at a street lamp, a car door, or even just a simple zipper on your jacket, take a moment to look closer at the hidden, invisible, protective layers of the world around you. You might just see the escape artist at work.